How far will Vladimir Putin go? That is the main question as Russia's invasion of Ukraine increases in brutality but decreases in progress. Russia clearly badly underestimated the Ukrainian military and the swift and coordinated response from the West, and overestimated its own ability to sweep to some kind of quick victory. But now what? If Putin is backed into a corner, is he more dangerous? And should NATO now risk establishing some kind of no-fly zone to stop the slaughter of civilians, or would that lead to a world war? Look, NATO is set to host an extraordinary summit this coming Thursday, and these are the key questions on the table. But one man with a unique and direct insight into fighting Russia and supporting Ukraine and its President Volodymyr Zelensky is retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. He got international attention back in 2019 when he testified before the U.S. Congress. Well, the Iraq War vet, he won a Purple Heart, was the director for the European Affairs for the United States National Security Council. Vindman, of course, was in the room for President Trump's infamous phone call to President Zelensky, in which Trump pressured Zelensky to open an investigation into Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden in exchange for military aid. It was Vindman's testimony that helped lead to Donald Trump's impeachment.
I was concerned by the call. What I heard was inappropriate. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
But how far should the West go to help Ukraine, and how far is Putin willing to go? Let's find out. Joining me now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Sir, thanks for your service, and I appreciate you joining us. Back in December, you predicted in a New York Times article that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was going to happen. The question on everybody's mind, especially with this NATO meeting coming up on Thursday, is how far is Vladimir Putin willing to go? What is your assessment of him?
Well, certainly he wants to rally his people around the boogeyman of NATO and NATO aggression. But that's an important rhetorical tool for him to maintain power, maintain control of the elites, focus them in on an external enemy. But he is not interested in pushing and poking towards a provocation or a war with NATO. He's already bogged down in Ukraine. His forces are facing significant challenges on the battlefield. Facing a much more capable and powerful NATO is not something that he's interested in doing right now.
Well, if that's the case, why is there a red line on a no-fly zone? President Zelensky, as you know, and you know him well, continues to plead for a NATO-enforced no-fly zone, even for humanitarian corridors. If Putin is just using rhetoric, why is NATO so fearful of doing that to protect lives?
Because from my experience in government, one of the things I learned is that when the Russians start to saber rattle, when they start to signal a risk of escalation, we always go to our worst case scenario of a nuclear war. So we go all the way up the escalatory ladder to a nuclear war instead of recognizing that Russia also has no interest in nuclear war. They just have an interest in messaging a nuclear war. The reason that they don't want to do that is because they fully understand, comprehend the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. We should think about risks as probability and consequence. The consequence can be catastrophic, but the probability of an outcome is extremely, extremely low. So we should be making decisions based on that basis.
So are you saying it's worth the risk to establish a no-fly zone?
I'm saying it's worth the risk to help the Ukrainians establish a no-fly zone. I fear that we very well may get to the point where NATO is compelled by the population, by our leaders, based on the brutality on the ground, to act. That could be weeks or months down the road as Russia's atrocities against the population continue to unfold. My prescription is actually more thoughtful and mindful. Why do we just simply avoid that question, that difficult challenge, and arm the Ukrainians to establish their own no-fly zone? That means the aircraft that they're asking for, the combat aerial vehicles that they're asking for, the air defense vehicles they're asking for, they could do it on their own. They just need to be equipped.
Sir, you cite the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which has been sort of the Cold War doctrine. That is kind of predicated on two rational actors. You kill us, we'll kill you. That's your kind of defense.
Right.
There's a lot of questions whether Vladimir Putin is a rational actor at this point. What's your assessment?
So I think he's a rational actor. He's been bred to operate in a particular way from 22 years of power, and the ability to achieve his aims through increased pressure, through doubling down, through more belligerent actions. And now he's basically hit a wall, and he's not quite sure how to respond to this. He's not quite sure what to do with the fact that there's starting to be a simmering unrest in his own population. The fact that his military has not been able to achieve its aims. That's something that he's trying to consider, think through in detail. You can see that unfolding in the fact that military leadership is starting to get switched out. He fired a couple of his senior generals. He's imprisoned elements of the FSB, the security services there. So I think this is just going to be a learning process for him, something that has not been the case for 20 years, that he's been able to get away with his actions without consequence.
When you were working in the Trump, during the Trump administration, Donald Trump said NATO is irrelevant. And I know he reluctantly ended up giving weapons to Ukraine, but after first that fateful phone call that you spoke about. Tell me about, did that weaken the NATO alliance, and did that in any way encourage this Russian invasion?
To me, there's no question that there's a straight line, a logic link between the events, between the Russian scandal and today. Certainly, President Trump undermined the rhetoric around our ironclad support to Ukraine. And then, of course, the perceptions around divisions between the U.S. and NATO and internal to the U.S. These were all critical in terms of the kinds of calculations that Vladimir Putin was making in determining whether to launch this war. And President Trump bears a huge amount of responsibility for that. He has blood on his hands. He in fact encouraged Putin all the way to the last hours before this war by touting him and cheerleading for him. So,
last question to you, sir. What's the way out? There's peace talks. No one knows if they're shams or not. Is Putin backed in a corner? Does he lash out, or does he back down? What is the golden bridge of retreat for him if he needs one, or does he continue? In your view, what's the way out here?
So the way out is really decisive military defeat for Putin in the short term. I think if we don't help Ukraine, there's going to be a kind of incrementalism and a favor towards this standard practice for Vladimir Putin of incrementally ratcheting up pressure. We could see chemical weapons strikes unfold and things of that nature. So I think, to me, the way out is we give Ukraine what it needs to obstruct Russian military from achieving their objectives. They grind down the Russian military quickly, including air power and cruise missile strikes. And on that basis, Putin is compelled to negotiate because he just doesn't have the means to achieve his aims through force.
Well, we'll find out what happens. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.